Hey everyone, I got some great questions and observations from a friend about Bitcoin. So I want to read you some of what he sent me, and then my responses and my own thoughts and observations based on that. Okay, so first of all, he says, I am intrigued by Bitcoin enough to hold the Bitcoin I bought 8 years ago, but not necessarily buy more. And so he's saying basically he just doesn't have the conviction to buy more, and I presume the observations below are the reason for that. So I am going to answer his observations below to the best of my ability. Okay, so he says, my position, meaning Joel's position assumes several things. Number one, people will continue to collectively agree that Bitcoin can be a store of value in some sort of unwritten social agreement. And then he says, all money generally is this way, so Bitcoin is dependent on this remaining true. What happens if people decide another crypto is better? Well, actually, let me address it piece by piece. So one, anything that is used as money is dependent on people believing that it will store its value over time. Gold works that way. The US dollar works that way. Everything works that way. And what matters is the credibility of its monetary properties. So all of these things, people's objections often miss something that is answered in 3 words, which is credibility of monetary properties. And I'll talk more about what that is. So yes, all of money assumes that people have decided that the credibility of the monetary properties is good enough to use it as money. So the US dollar has no inherent value. It's a piece of paper. It's literally a piece of paper, and you have to use it to pay your taxes, but you can literally get US dollars 5 minutes before you pay your taxes. So it's not like you actually have to hold US dollars to pay your taxes. You just have to have them at the point at which you actually need to pay the taxes. And of course, the US military, people say, yeah, but the US has a military. Well, so did every other country where the dollar, their currency went to zero. Every country where the currency went to zero also had a military, and they couldn't stop it. So what matters is the credibility of the monetary properties. So the reason people use the US dollar is they believe that although the US government prints about 7% more money per year, that they won't print more than 7% more per year, and that will only show up in inflation of between maybe 4 to 9% per year. And most people don't think there's a better alternative because they don't understand Bitcoin. And so the credibility of those monetary properties of the US dollar is good enough for them. Now, I don't think it should be, because if you understand Bitcoin, you realize that the credibility of those monetary properties of the US dollar completely suck. Like, they make no sense. It makes absolutely no sense to hold US dollars if you can hold Bitcoin instead. But a lot of people, again, don't understand Bitcoin. But gold works the same way. The credibility of gold's monetary properties works the same way. So he talks about sort of the social contract that it has value because we agree it has value. That's actually not the way it works. It has value due to the credibility of its monetary properties. So once something has credible monetary properties, then it becomes value because of the credibility of those monetary properties. And after that process happens, you can trust that it will retain its value to the degree that it retains the credibility of those monetary properties. So it's not sort of some weird accident that gold is valuable. Gold has better monetary properties than any other metal. And that was discovered thousands of years ago. Humans figured out that gold was the scarcest metal on the periodic table that had the other, requirements of being a good money. It was divisible, it was durable, it was portable, it was authenticatable, verifiable, all of those things. Gold met those requirements better than any other metal. And it wasn't like some grand, round table decided that. People tried lots of different metals, and it kept coming up that gold was more scarce, more divisible, more portable, more durable, more authenticatable, so they kept coming back to gold. And so as more people used gold, more people used gold. And as soon as everybody was using gold, everybody was using gold because everybody was using gold. So again, it was not some sort of weird, social contract. It was the credibility of gold's monetary properties. That is entirely the reason gold has the value it has, which is now more than $20 trillion. It's the most valuable asset in the entire world. And Bitcoin's about 2 trillion. So Bitcoin is less than 10% of gold, which is something like 22 trillion, and Bitcoin's 2 trillion. So anyway, so it comes down to the credibility of the monetary properties, and that is an objective thing. So if you went back to the beginning of time and you understood the periodic table and you understood, how rare each of the elements was in the world, you could have predicted in advance that Bitcoin would emerge as the monetary metal for, history until the advent of the telegraph and basically electronic communications, which made gold hard to use because gold is not electronic in nature. So prior to the invention of the telegraph, you could have predicted prior to that point that gold would be the money that everybody would land on. And you could have done that far in advance. It wasn't it was not a social contract that everybody just decided. It was based on the credibility of gold's monetary properties, and gold had those credibility of those monetary properties from the very moment the earth came into existence, based on how much gold there was compared to other metals and the properties, the monetary properties of gold. So Bitcoin, it's easy to see how Bitcoin has become the dominant cryptocurrency and the fastest growing, most used sort of new form of money. And again, it's not because a bunch of people got together and said, let's just use Bitcoin. It's because the credibility of Bitcoin's monetary properties are far better than the credibility of the monetary properties of any other electronic currency. And I'll go into more details on that. So again, it's not a social contract. It's based on the credibility of the monetary properties. Those three words, extremely important. Credibility of the monetary properties. Okay, so what happens if people decide another cryptocurrency is better? The answer is they're not going to, because the design of Bitcoin hits a very specific target. And so it turns out, in retrospect, Bitcoin hit the exact bullseye for what you want in an electronic currency. And more than 20,000 other cryptocurrencies exist by people trying to change something about Bitcoin. And every single attempt they've made has made it worse. So at this point, Bitcoin has 16 years of history, 1/6. It has what's called hash power, which is the Bitcoin miners securing and auditing the network. That is, many dozens of times larger than the next closest cryptocurrency. And I'm not even sure what's even second on that list because nothing's even remotely close. So Bitcoin is just absolutely dominant. And in order for something to take the place of Bitcoin, it would need to have better monetary properties. The problem is it can't have better monetary properties because it's never going to be able to compete with the security architecture of Bitcoin as it relates to the Bitcoin miners and all of that. Sorry, give me 1 second here. So the Bitcoin mining network is so dominant that nothing is even remotely secure as compared to Bitcoin. And the security is a key part of the certainty and credibility of the monetary properties. So you can't make another cryptocurrency that's more, you can make it that's more divisible, durable, authenticatable, portable, blah, blah, blah. But the problem is, again, not the monetary properties, it is the credibility of those monetary properties. The level of certainty with which people in the world can be absolutely certain that will not change. So people are only going to decide another cryptocurrency is better if the credibility of those monetary properties is higher. And Bitcoin is the original, the most distributed, the most decentralized, the most secure, the most ABC, XYZ, every conceivable thing you'd want in a cryptocurrency. Bitcoin already has it. And there's no compelling would take the mantle from Bitcoin. And if that were even possible, it would have already happened in the last 16 years. So something really has to be radically better in some profound way to be better than Bitcoin. And I just don't see, neither me nor numerous other people have researched this, don't see how that's even possible. Okay, so it's not going to be another cryptocurrency, and you can, if you want to watch the videos I've done specifically about why nothing will outcompete Bitcoin and why there will not be a Bitcoin. So, again, if you want to understand why nothing will outcompete Bitcoin, do a search for the word outcompete. OUTCOMPETE, outcompete on my website, joelbaumgar.com, in the resource section, or on my Facebook page, or the keyword search MySpace, MYSPACE, which talks about why Bitcoin will not be, just the way Facebook replaced MySpace, why that will not happen to Bitcoin. I've got a lot of good resources about that out there. All right, so then he goes on to say, or maybe the government decides we're going to make our own blockchain, crypto, and there will only be 15 million instead of 21 million like Bitcoin's, and it's backed by a precious metal. I would say, well, that's already happened. The US dollar was a currency backed by precious metal, which was gold, and then they broke the promise. And the problem is every government currency, they always break the promise. The government promises to be responsible. They tie it to precious metals. Then they 100% of the time throughout all of human history have always printed more of the currency than they had precious metal to back it, and it has devalued the currency, and eventually the currency has collapsed. That is what has happened with every government managed money throughout all time. So the government's already done that, and if they make it a cryptocurrency or a central bank digital currency, CBDC, it doesn't matter. Again, we're looking at the credibility of the monetary properties. Governments have no ability to be credible with the monetary properties because everybody knows they're going to debase the currency. Debasing the currency means inflate it away or change the basis of it. So instead of, in the case of Bitcoin, there's 21 million, there will never be more. In the case of the US dollars, there's 22 trillion, and they're just printing more, 7% more a year. So within a year or two, there will be $23 trillion in circulation, and there's just no end in sight. They'll never stop doing that. Okay, so then it goes on to say the original Bitcoin will only ever be 21 million, but you can make an exact copy of the blockchain and call it Bitcoin 2.0. So instead of the government printing money, is there a risk that other coders will write new cryptos? And how does Bitcoin retain its value if someone makes another one exactly like it with only 10 tokens? So it's even more scarce because there's only 10 tokens instead of 21 million, or 10 million instead of 21 million. Again, what matters is the credibility of the monetary properties. So if I come out and say, hey, here's Joel coin, and there's only 10 of them, it's super scarce. The problem is, yeah, but it's not decentralized. You have no way of knowing it's going to only stay at 10. In the case of Bitcoin, there's more than 100,000 people running Bitcoin nodes, every one of which has a veto over changes to that 21 million supply. If I roll out Joel coin, and I'm the only one who has a node that supports Joel coin, you don't have any way of believing or knowing that I'm not going to change the rules on you. And so it makes no sense to pursue some other crypto because you just have no way of knowing that it's going to have a fixed supply. In the case of Bitcoin, it's distributed worldwide. There's more than 100,000 nodes. They're running on satellites. They're running on personal computers. I've got 2 Bitcoin nodes running at my house. All of those have a veto over changes to the network. No other cryptocurrency is like even remotely close to that, which means you just can't trust that it won't change. And other cryptocurrencies are constantly changing. They're changing how much there are. They're changing who gets it. They're changing how it works. And you just can't trust that somebody's not going to pull the rug out from under you. Same with the government. Obviously, you can't trust the government not to pull the rug out from under you. He also asks, how does the distribution of Bitcoin eventually happen? Meaning, how does it become the means people start to buy a house or a business? Is that the goal? So yeah, eventually every currency, strong currencies outcompete weak currencies. So as more people hold a strong currency and spend a weak currency, which is what people are doing. They're holding Bitcoin, spending US dollars. And as that happens, they end up with a higher and higher percentage of their net worth in Bitcoin. So eventually you get to the place where I am, where I've got virtually 100%, other than very, very low bank account balances to just make sure a check doesn't bounce to a babysitter or something like that who doesn't take Bitcoin. I have, 100% of my liquid assets in Bitcoin. So as that happens, more and more people transact with more and more people exclusively in Bitcoin. And I already transact exclusively in Bitcoin with anyone who will take Bitcoin. And that number of people keeps going up. So as that number of people keeps going up, a larger and larger percent of the economy is people swapping Bitcoin instead of US dollars. So if you want to see this work in real time with other currencies, look at the US dollar in Venezuela. So almost nobody's trying to store value in the Venezuelan bolivar because it hyperinflated to basically zero. And so what everybody's doing is they might buy they might get paid in Venezuelan bolivar, and then 5 minutes later they go buy some groceries, but they're not holding on to that currency for longer than minutes or days at the most. So more and more of the economy is transacting US dollars. Well, US dollars are not the official currency, but people are doing exactly what they're doing with Bitcoin. They're holding the US dollars and spending the Venezuelan bolivar. And as more and that happens, the US dollar is a better store of value, and the Venezuelan bolivar slowly goes to zero, and a larger and larger percentage of the economy ends up just US dollars. So the same thing is happening with Bitcoin. It's just much earlier in the adoption cycle. It's a lot easier for people to switch from one paper currency to another because they understand it. With Bitcoin, there's a high learning curve, so it takes a lot longer for people to get it, but that is already happening with Bitcoin. And as that happens, people are buying things. They're buying cars. They're starting businesses. They're like, a lot of that's already happening. It's just happening on a small and growing scale. So it's sort of not on the radar for most people. Okay. Then next series of questions related to here says, the value will at some point in some unforeseeable way be able to be, or how will the value at some point in the future be able to be determined without knowing the value of the dollar? Meaning, what if the dollar collapses? How do we value Bitcoin? Isn't it always based on the US dollar? As in, so the answer is no. The value is not based on the US dollar. And I'm going to do a separate video, so I'll turn this into two parts because I'm afraid, because it's raining so hard right now, that I'm going to lose this video. So I'm going to go ahead and upload this video, and I will start a second one momentarily where I answer that question.